The sun was bright that morning, its golden rays sweeping across the sprawling city and bouncing off glass towers that stood like monuments to ambition. Yet, inside the sleek black car parked before a wrought iron gate, the warmth of the light seemed hollow, stripped of meaning. Adrien Veyron, one of the city's youngest and most envied millionaires, sat motionless behind the wheel. His reflection glared back at him in the windshield, not triumphant, not assured, but strangely uncertain. To the outside world, he was everything a man could ever dream of becoming. He possessed power, wealth, status, and a name whispered with admiration in luxury penthouses and glittering ballrooms. But inside his chest, a quiet storm churned. And with each passing day, doubt pressed harder against his ribs. He had everything, or so the world said. But he was beginning to wonder if the one thing he truly longed for had slipped through his grasp before he ever held it. Cassandra was her name, a woman who carried beauty the way a queen carried her crown. She was elegant, dazzling, and perpetually framed by admiration wherever she went. They had been together for nearly a year, and to most of society they seemed inevitable, the golden couple everyone expected. She wore designer gowns like armor. Her laughter filled the finest parties, and her presence beside Adrien was like a sparkling accessory that completed his polished life. She was the girlfriend every man envied him for. But in Adrien's quiet moments, when champagne glasses were no longer clinking and the echo of applause had faded, he could not silence the whisper inside him. Did she love him? Or was it only the fortune and power that drew her close? He wrestled with that question like a man clutching a blade by its edge. The uncertainty was unbearable. The thought that her devotion might only be a mask gnawed at him in the lonely hours of night. And so, in a decision that felt equal parts reckless and desperate, Adrien devised a test that would alter the course of his life. He would pretend to be broken, stripped of the strength and privilege that so often defined him. He told Cassandra that he had been in a car accident, that his legs no longer worked, and he would now live in a wheelchair. He told her he would need her care, her patience, her love, not for parties or cameras, but for the simple, exhausting moments of living. It was cruel, manipulative even, but Adrien told himself it was the only way to uncover the truth. Would she remain by his side in his weakest hours? Or would she vanish the moment the glamour disappeared? The first days of the experiment were strange, almost unbearable. Adrien sat in the grand halls of his mansion in a wheelchair, his body upright but feigning fragility. Cassandra hovered beside him, her voice syrupy, her words carefully chosen. "You are still the man I adore," she whispered, brushing her manicured fingers against his cheek. She posed with him for pictures, her expressions perfectly tragic, and her captions on social media painted her as a devoted partner standing by her injured love. The likes poured in, sympathy flooded her comments, and for a brief moment Adrien wondered if he had been wrong, if she was perhaps truer than he gave her credit for. But then came the moments when no one was watching. When the cameras were tucked away and her audience had dispersed, Cassandra's facade began to crack. Her laughter grew sharp, tinged with annoyance. Her patience thinned. She excused herself more frequently, citing dinners, charity galas, or urgent shopping trips. Adrien began to notice the sighs she tried to hide when he struggled to pick up a glass of water, the subtle roll of her eyes when he asked for help. His heart, already wounded by doubt, began to ache with certainty. If love was meant to endure the storm, Cassandra's devotion was dissolving in the first rainfall. It was during those days of quiet unraveling that another figure began to emerge from the background. Someone Adrien had scarcely noticed before. Marbel was her name, a maid who had been employed at the estate for only a few months. She wore her uniform with a simplicity that held dignity. Her purple dress neat and pressed, her hair tied back in a practical knot. She moved through the halls quietly, her presence often dismissed by guests and employers alike, yet Adrien began to see her in ways he hadn't before. When Cassandra scoffed at his clumsy attempt to pour water, it was Marbel who slipped in silently and placed the glass in his hand. When Cassandra declined to push his wheelchair through the garden, Marbel took the handles without hesitation, her steps steady, her silence comforting. She didn't fawn, she didn't pity, and she didn't treat him like a fragile ornament. She treated him like a man, still whole, still worthy of respect. At first, Adrien dismissed these small acts as nothing more than duty. But as days stretched into weeks, he realized there was something in her gaze, in the quiet strength with which she supported him. She saw him not as Adrien Veyron, the millionaire, but simply Adrien, a man struggling, doubting, hurting. It stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, an ache not of loneliness, but of longing to be seen, truly seen. Cassandra's mask, meanwhile, continued to slip. At a party hosted on the mansion's terrace, where chandeliers glittered under the night sky and the air smelled of champagne, she finally revealed her disdain. She laughed loudly, pointing at Adrien's still figure in the wheelchair, mocking him with words wrapped in cruelty. "Look at him," she said to her friends, her laughter cutting sharper than glass. "The shadow of the man he used to be." Her guests chuckled nervously, unwilling to challenge her cruelty, but unwilling to fully embrace it either. Adrien sat in silence, his chest tight, humiliation burning through him like fire, but behind him stood Marbel, her hands resting firmly on the handles of his chair, her expression unreadable yet unyielding. She didn't speak, didn't scold Cassandra, but her presence was a shield, her quiet dignity louder than any protest. In that moment, Adrien realized what he had been blind to all along. The woman beside him in glittering gowns had never truly seen him, but the woman in a maid's uniform had. That night, alone in his room, Adrien removed the neck brace he had worn for weeks and stared at his reflection. The charade had served its purpose. He knew Cassandra's heart now, and the knowledge was like a weight dragging him down and lifting him up at the same time. The next morning, when Cassandra entered with her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, Adrien was ready. She announced her plans with friends, barely glancing at him. Adrien's voice cut through her air of superiority. "Cassandra," he said firmly. When she turned, expecting weakness, she saw him stand. His body was steady, strong, his legs carrying him with ease. Her face crumbled, fury twisting her beauty into something brittle and sharp. "You lied to me!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the vast hall. Adrien's eyes were calm, almost tired. "No," he said quietly. "I showed you the truth." Without hesitation, Cassandra stormed out, her curses trailing behind her like smoke, leaving Adrien with a silence that felt strangely liberating. Marbel, however, remained. She gasped when he rose from the chair, her hands gripping her apron tightly. For a long moment, she said nothing, her wide eyes fixed on him. Adrien braced himself for anger, for scorn, for betrayal. But when Marbel finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I knew," she said softly. Adrien blinked. "You knew?" She nodded. "I saw the strength in your arms when you thought no one was watching. I noticed the steadiness in your steps, but it didn't matter. What I saw most was the loneliness in your eyes, the kind no wheelchair could disguise." Adrien felt his throat tighten. For years he had feared that no one would ever love him for who he was, stripped of his wealth and power. Yet here stood a woman who had seen past both his masks, the mask of strength and the mask of weakness. He confessed then, his voice breaking, that his fear of being unloved had driven him to this cruel act. And Marbel, with her quiet grace, forgave him, not with grand gestures, but with the simple truth that she cared more for the man he was than the wealth that surrounded him. In the weeks that followed, the mansion transformed. The shallow parties ceased, the meaningless laughter faded, and in its place came the sound of birdsong in the gardens, the rhythm of purposeful footsteps on marble floors. Adrien no longer spent his days entertaining socialites, but instead walking slowly through the estate with Marbel, listening to her stories. She told him of her childhood in a small village, of the hardships she endured, of dreams she tucked away because they felt too fragile to voice. Adrien listened, and more importantly, he cared. He found himself drawn to the simplicity of her honesty, the courage of her survival, and the strength of her quiet compassion. Their bond grew not through grand declarations, but through small gestures, the way she brewed his coffee just right, The way he helped her carry heavy trays, though servants never did. The way they lingered in the rose garden at dusk, speaking little yet saying everything. Months passed, and one morning Adrien found himself standing before the mirror once more. The reflection staring back was no longer hollow. His eyes were alive, filled with purpose, softened by something he had thought himself incapable of, hope. When he turned from the mirror, Marbel was there, her smile gentle but radiant. No words were needed. They did not need society's approval, nor the applause of parties, nor the masks of wealth and status. They had trust, honesty, and love, the kind that could not be bought, the kind that survived deception and revealed itself in kindness. For Adrien Veyron, one of the city's youngest millionaires, the greatest treasure he had ever found was not in the glimmer of gold or the shine of power. It was in the quiet eyes of a woman who saw him for who he truly was, and loved him still. And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Every click helps us spread more stories of hope, compassion, and true love.